Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we are going to do another review of an article, and it is going to be the Temple of Mount Gerzim in the Bible and Archaeology. So I know a little, based on what we know from archaeology, there would have been two Samaritan temples in Mount Gerzim. For those who don't know what Mount Gerzim is, again, if you go to Shechem, Pres de Nablus, the west bank of Nablus is between two mountains. One is Mount Ebal, where Joshua had his altar. The other is Mount Gerzim, where the Samaritans had their temple. There would have been two temples there. One was built by during the Persian period, around the time of Nehemiah, and was later destroyed by the Jewish Hasmonean dynasty. Same people who, this Hanukkah story. That's them. They're the ones who liberated the Jewish temple in Jerusalem from the Greeks. And later on, after that was destroyed, it was later rebuilt. After the second Jewish temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, Mount Gerzim, the temple there, was rebuilt with permission by the Romans and lasted until the Byzantine period. And there was a Byzantine revolt, and the Samaritan temple was destroyed by the Byzantines. So let's take a look what the archaeology has to say about this temple. Temples have been found throughout the ancient Near East. What went on at these sites, along with reconstructing architectural remains, and scholars piece together ancient worship practices. So here we have this massive staircase that led to the Mount Gerzim temple. So let me see if I can't really click on it and enlarge it. But I know that this dig was actually very controversial at the time when it was done, because the Samaritans are still around. Like, the Samaritans they're not like the Philistines. They're not an extinct ethnic group or religious group. They are very much a living ethnic and religious group today. And they still worship Mount Gerzim. They still sacrifice lambs every Passover around the site of the temple. And it is still, and this area, the ruins of this temple, are still very much an active worship site, the Samaritan people. And they have a synagogue right next door, and right next door is like the place where they sacrificed the lambs. And they did not like that this place was all dug up, because they liked it worshiping nature, and they felt that when it was all natural and overgrown, they felt like they're with Abraham and Isaac. And they remind the excavations were kind of like what we know traditional Catholics will call a reclamation. It ruined a religious cultic site and made it just needlessly ugly. But you can still tour the site today. Let's take a look at what we know about this site. Although it's not possible to identify every ritual activity that took place at ancient temples, Anne Catherine Hammer of the University of Copenhagen has reconstructed some that may have occurred at the Temple of Mount Gerzim. My guess is probably strong parallels with the book of Leviticus. In her article, Reactivating Remembrance, Interactive Inscriptions, Mount Gerzim, published in Archaeological Review, she investigates the inscriptions and the Mount Gerzim temple. These featured in people's worship at the temple. So, for example, they had inscriptions on pots that were donated to the temple, in pans and cups that were given. Although the Mount Gerzim temple isn't mentioned in the Bible, unless it's a Catholic Bible, where it is mentioned in, I believe, 1st or 2nd Maccabees, if I recall correctly. Worship at Mount Gerzim is referenced in John 4:19-24, where Jesus speaks to the Samaritan woman. During the conversation, she asked whether the people should worship at Gerzim or Jerusalem. The woman said to him, "Sir, you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is Jerusalem." That was actually, and it is still, the main point of dispute between Samaritanism and Judaism. Where do you have God's temple? From this passage in the Bible and other historical texts, we see that Samaritans viewed Mount Gerzim as a primary place of worship. So there was a lot of archaeological activity in the area even prior to the time of David. However, Samaritans are on the wrong mountain. The place where Joshua's altar was Mount Ebal, and it has been found as well, if I recall correctly. Mind you, with some dispute, to be fair. Archaeological evidence shows that a temple was built at Mount Gerzim around 450 BC during the Persian period. The temple complex was expanded during the Hellenistic period, 200 BCE, and it functioned until the Maccabees destroyed it around 110 BCE. Therefore, the omission of Mount Gerzim temple in the New Testament isn't surprising, since the temple was destroyed long before the New Testament was written, like by 100 years, like 150 to 200 years. Since the first temple of Mount Gerzim dates to the Persian period, you might expect a reference to it in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, such as the book of Nehemiah. However, text is silent about its existence. As I said, Gerzim's Bibles do mention this temple. Temple of Mount Gerzim once contained numerous inscriptions, many of which commemorate offerings. They name a gift that is offered to the deity, the giver, and his or her dependents. And it's also worth noting that these are not saying, like, it's not like how Protestants would view it. Protestants would view inscriptions of, oh, here is a big thank you note. See how much I gave to the temple, etc. How wonderful I am. Like, that's not the general idea behind these inscriptions. It's more of, think of it as a way of sending a letter to God. Is probably a better way. Of these dedicated inscriptions, Gunmi has identified about 50 that requested a counter gift of good remembrance from the deity. So yeah, so like these inscriptions should be seen as a form of prayer. Like pagan temples did similar things with inscriptions. She explains that the dedicated inscriptions would have been placed within the Mount Gerzim temple to remind the deity of the offering and the giver. And the deity, in case you're wondering, in case anyone forgets, is Yahweh, the God of Israel, the Holy Trinity, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There appears to be a common notion that to remember positively by a deity is desirable. No kidding. Probably conceptually similar to the notion of being blessed, that it can be obtained by placing a physical object in close proximity to where the deity is perceived to be present, so that this object, the inscription, would continually remind the deity of the worshipper who donated the inscription. Well, that's pointless. Well, do you pray? Yes. Well, don't you think God knows what you need before you need it? Well, yeah. Well, then why do you pray? Like, God does expect our interaction, and this is just another way of praying. And I'll point out many ways it's a very practical way of praying, and it's a way of putting your money where your mouth is worth. These inscriptions, depending on what you're especially what you're dedicating, is having a positive impact on how other people are worshiping. Even though this is, biblically speaking, an illicit temple. And I point out, why we traditional Catholics, why is this such a huge debate as to where the temple is supposed to be? That actually does play into traditional Catholic theology as well. God did command only one temple to be made. God praised Hezekiah for tearing down illicit temples. And both the Jews and Samaritans, they may have disagreed on where the temple should be, but they did agree it needs to be in the right place. We as traditional Catholics do not have such emphasis on where to build a physical temple, but we do have emphasis on it in spiritual matters. Orthodoxy, the right church that you go to, and denomination does matter because both institutionally and theologically you need to be in the right place as a figure of speech. And we see this debate as to where the temple is supposed to be, and it's still very, very important. It's not that God likes taking pillow naps on Mount Gerzim over Jerusalem more. It's to show that symbolically we need to have our theology right. We need to have our doctrine right. And that's why there is only one true church. Outside there's no salvation. Though we do not know the original location of the inscriptions within the sanctuary, They would have been placed where the visitors could see them. Gerzim describes how later worshippers, both literate and illiterate, might have interacted with these inscriptions. We simply cannot assume that all visitors to these sanctuaries were literate, so an actual recitation of the text of the inscription seems unlikely. However, it is possible that some literate visitors could have read aloud to others. It may even be possible that the literate temple personnel could have assisted visitors in reading inscriptions. Even if visitors were unable to read or had no opportunity to have the inscriptions read to them, these inscriptions may have been culturally recognizable as objects that required interactive response. If that is the case, then inscriptions may have triggered the visitors to the sanctuary to touch one or several of the inscriptions that they passed on their way and remembered be, and they did so. So like a tombstone. Like, I may not read every tombstone. Like, I, as a Church of Catholic, pray for the dead. And I might walk through a cemetery and may not be able to read every inscription that comes by, because some of them just get weathered with time. But I do know that there is someone who is to be commemorated, who wants to be remembered and prayed for. So I'll simply pray for that person, whatever they need or want, and pray for their repose. If this reconstruction is correct, it gives us a window into the ritual practice that Mount Gerzim Temple may have entailed. Worshippers read and or echo the inscriptions, repeatedly reminding the deity of the giver and his or her offering. Thus, the inscriptions featured in the temple from the worship of the giver and the later visitors. There is a temple inscription, the dedicatory inscription, comes temple on Mount Gerzim, which reads, "That which Yosef, son of the part lost, offered for his wife and his sons for the Lord in the temple," mentions a gift offered to the Lord Yahweh at the Mount Gerzim Temple. The inscription is currently housed in the Good Samaritan Museum. Mount Gerzim is not the only place to have interactive inscriptions. Gerzim identifies temples throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, dedicatory inscriptions that call others to remember them positively before the deity. The Mount Gerzim inscriptions resemble a large number of Aramaic dedicatory inscriptions and graffiti in the Eastern Mediterranean area, where the phrase "for good remembrance" and more common, "by he she be remembered for good," is widespread. And these other inscriptions dated roughly from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century CE, so 200 years before and 200 years after Jesus, and come from the sanctuaries of places such as Hatra and Asher in modern Iraq and Palmyra, modern Syria. Dedicatory inscriptions appear to have been common during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Learn more about the temple of Mount Gerzim and see its interactive inscriptions in the article "Reactivating Remembrance and Interactive Inscriptions of Mount Gerzim." So, that's some interesting information on dedications of Mount Gerzim, and a bit about the theology of why the Mount Gerzim Temple and the whole debate between it and Judaism is actually spiritually relevant for today, and why God made a rule of only one place of worship. So what do you guys think about the Mount Gerzim Temple? What do you guys know about the Samaritins down below? Love to hear you, and if you ever get a chance to check out an SSPX church, please do so. God bless.